New Zealand art has a deep and rich history. Many gifted artists have brought their unique talents to the cultural story of Aotearoa, and each of them is worthy of admiration. But there is one artist whose fame towers above all others: Colin McCann. McCann was a force of nature. He painted with a drive and vigour probably unmatched by anyone before or since. His paintings were often stark, visually understated or restrained. Yet they captured something authentic and remarkable about the land, the social fabric, and the cultural psyche of New Zealand in the 20th century. More than anyone else, McCann is responsible for creating a language of modern art distinct to Aotearoa. McCann was enormously influential on his artistic peers. Regardless of whether they loved him or loathed him, his presence and the gravitas of his work affected art makers throughout the nation.
Whether you loved the work or hated it, you couldn't get around the fact that he was a towering figure in the New Zealand art scene of that time. There's no question about that.
You know, there's a kind of a regionalist McCann, there's a kind of an internationalist McCann, there's a pre-modernist McCann, a kind of primitivist McCann, there's a modernist McCann, and there's a postmodernist McCann. You know, everybody who was talking about New Zealand art from all sorts of different perspectives could make use of McCann. And he was sort of like so high you couldn't get over him, so low you couldn't get under him, so wide you couldn't get around him.
He talks about his wall, he talks about Mondrian, he talks about Mondrian as the wall to get through, and so on and so forth. For me, I don't mean in a competitive sense, and I don't mean in any grandiose sense about myself, but he's a wall for anyone who wants to pick up a paintbrush in this country. McCann's the wall.
Books were beginning to appear about New Zealand art. When I first got interested in the subject, there were no books whatever. So even to see works by people like Colin McCann was quite difficult. By the 80s, that had all changed, and there was a lively literature about the arts as well as the arts themselves.
To have the opportunity to work with such a collection like the BNZ that has so many significant works by McCann is a treat for the team here. It's a rare thing to have so many works all at once by such an iconic artist.
Works in the collection really traverse a really wide gamut of his career. So there is the Kauri painting, which depicts where McCann lived in Titirangi. Even at the time, that was quite a highly sought after work. They bought that at auction actually at Webb's for $40,000 in the early 80s. So a big price back then.
He should never have occurred in this culture. It's extraordinary. I was told by experts overseas, you will never have genius break out in this country. This is the guy from Lisson Gallery. The country's too small for genius to occur. Well, it did.
3 works in this collection stand out in particular. Kauri, painted in 1953, Oh Let Us Weep, from 1969, and Is There Anything of Which One Can Say, Look, this is new? This remarkable 1982 work was one of McCann's final 4 paintings.
The amazing thing about McLeavy's close relationship with McCann was that he managed to secure one of the 4 last paintings McCann ever did for the collection, an enormously significant work which used to always hang over the stair in the Bank of New Zealand building in Shortland Street and just knock people out when they saw it. The other work that was bought at the same time was bought by Jenny Gibbs for $100,000, which seemed an enormous price at the time. And people wrote articles about it, and astonished by the expense and so on. And yet now $100,000 spent in 1987 seems like a very good investment.
McLeavy was still his dealer, and so he had access to Colin's, there were plenty of McCanns in the stockroom, so to speak. McLeavy was in a privileged position to be able to choose strong works by McCann for the BNZ collection, and my sense of it is that he tried to cover the field, as it were, to represent Colin's career as broadly as possible. The 8 works in the collection range from 1947 to 1982, which is a very large proportion of Collins' active career.
He died in May of 1987, but Wystan Curnow had put him into a show as part of the Sydney Biennale, I Will Need Words, in 1984, and yet that was after the period in which he'd pretty much stopped painting. That was kind of ending in 1982.
In 1993, McLeavy was asked to advise on the possible sale of McCann's Is There Anything of Which One Can Say, Look, This Is New? And he cautioned strongly against it. It is one of the cornerstones of the Bank of New Zealand art collection, he wrote. Much prestige flows to the bank from this one object.
Being in the presence of a painting like this is something quite special.
It's often claimed that these paintings represent Collins' loss of faith at the end of his life and his own personal despair. I dispute that reading of his work. I think it makes much more sense to look at his last work as a kind of dialogue between the New Testament and the Old, between the despair of Ecclesiastes and the faith and hope of St. Paul.
It was in the last exhibition that he had at Peter McLeavy Gallery, and you can really see a shift there from almost the optimism of some of the works in the 1970s to someone really grappling with what it meant to be human and what it meant to exist on this earth and be conscious.
One of the structural features of those last paintings is a dotted line, horizontal and vertical, which divides up the panel, which is of course the T cross that is so dominant in Collins' later work. So I think that there is a kind of surreptitious, redemptive suggestion of Christianity buried in the despairing comments of the Old Testament prophet.
The body of work at its highest levels that McCann put together can cut the mustard anywhere. I've stood there in Germany and I watched people with McCann paintings, and you could see the magnetism towards them. Who is this? What is this? Why don't we know about this? Why is it so expensive? There's just no question in my mind how important the best of his work is.